Welcome back to another episode of Morning Coffee. I'm your host, Rick Alexander. You guys can interact with me or follow me at @RickAlexander_ or at the Morning Coffee Podcast on Instagram. Now, if you're getting a lot from this show, if it's changing your life or even changing the way that you look at your life, it would mean the world to me if you would head to iTunes and give us a 5-star review so that we can continue to climb the charts and get this information to more and more people. Over the last year and a half, I've focused my work on the story that we tell ourselves about our lives. Your entire life is a bit of a story that you're telling yourself. And if you could tell yourself a different story, you could probably change your life quite a bit. And so I did that work for the release of my newest book, which is coming out in early 2020. But getting excited for that release, I actually wanted to go through a lot of the information that I had learned, a lot of my notes, and synthesize it into maxims, which is what we're getting into today. I've got 21 maxims to maximize your life, and what these are is just things that seem to be true about the human experience. And if you could understand how they are true, you could understand how they could change your life. And so if you go to rickalexander.com, what you're going to find is if you click on articles, the maxim of the day is going to be posted, whatever the last maxim was, and it's also going to have journal entries and thought experiments in there so that you can figure out how to apply these things to your own lives. And so a bit of an interactive experience. So throughout the next year, through my speaking, through my book release, and through these maxims, I'm excited to see how this information can really change the world and change your world if you give it an opportunity to. As we try to step into a bigger existence, whatever that means for you, right? That might mean just starting a business or a new relationship or trying to come out with a message, something you've learned in some way. Whenever you find yourself doing that, you run up against all of these fears and these limiting beliefs. And one of the things that I've dove into is in my research in the last year and a half is this idea of fear. And the reason is because a lot of the people that I put through the Clarity Academy, I realize they are staring at one of two roads, but they have this level of fear that's like paralyzing their ability to move forward. And as we start to deduce it, we start to look at it, we start to talk about it and take it apart, one of the things you realize is that we fear the idea of the thing far more than the actual thing itself. And that's really important to understand, because if you look at your fear, it's going to reveal what it actually is. And so if you can take a step back, you realize what fear is just a survival mechanism, right? Like people that didn't have it they wouldn't pass on their genes, so we need fear to keep us alive. But as you put the human animal in the 21st century, the manifestation of our fear is no longer this thing that keeps us alive. Instead, it's this thing that walls us into a smaller existence. And so as we decide that we want to do something, fear pops up a wall. What most people tend to do is just go somewhere else. They go where their fear isn't. And so in a way, our fear directs us. It directs the evolution of ourself. It directs how our lives end up turning out. But if you can face that fear, again, what you realize is that it's actually the idea of the thing far more than the thing itself. Like most people are scared of what failure means more than what it says, which positions them to continue to experience that same fear. So what do I mean by this? If you're scared of what failure means, most likely you're scared that you have this fear that it means you're a failure. You have this fear that it means you are incompetent. But actually, fear is an informational input, right? And so if you think back on the reason we have fear, which is the survival mechanism, it's just feeding you information that you need to know to keep you alive. And so if you're shouldering some sort of existential fear in some way, and again, we're not talking about physical fears as much because those can be controlled with breathing and different things. But as we're talking about existential fear, if you're running up against the fear of failure, try to figure out, what is it actually saying? What do you need to shore up? What do you need to figure out? You know, a lot of times when people want to do something great and then they feel like they're not good enough, a lot of times people say like, no, you are good enough. You can do it. And my advice is a little different. You're not good enough as you currently are. And if you were, you'd already have that thing. And so the fact that you're running up against this fear means that there's something about you that you need to work through, right? And so a lot of people just say, well, like, oh, ignore it, ignore the fear and do it anyway. Maybe, but what if that fear is giving you an informational input about something legit? And so then the other side of that is, then do you allow your fear to hold you back? Well, no, of course not. It's just an informational input. So let's stop tying all this emotion to it and making it something that it's not. It's trying to tell you things. And if you take heed of those things, you could actually probably increase the quality of your life quite a bit. And so this is the literal thought that contributes to performance anxiety, right? Because people are scared of what failure means about them. If you were just realizing, oh, failure is going to say something to you, and when it says something to you, it's teaching you something, it's like an informational input in some way that you can apply to your life, then in the context of performance, it's actually a good thing, right? Because there are moments to pivot and moments to learn and moments to change and moments to improve. But if you're scared of what that failure means about you, well, then it starts to contribute to performance anxiety, right? Because then you start then you start putting the focus on yourself. And when you put your focus on yourself, you begin to devolve into these loops of metacognition. Metacognition, this thing that thinking about thinking, and that's kind of what's happening when we start to delve into our fears. Oftentimes we get into these loops of like, what does this say about me, and what does this mean, and then, well, what does this thought mean? And so we start to think about thinking. And typically in a performance situation, if you're thinking about thinking, you're probably fucked. But the other thing to understand is that metacognition is what gives you the ability to make new choices in the first place, right? It is the thing that if you're aware that you're thinking, if you can think about your thinking, then you're not at the constant control of your first thought, the thoughts that pop into your head. But the best performers in the world get really good at discerning whether the current moment requires deliberation or action, and then they further minimize the time they spend in indecision. And we've done tons of shows on indecision, because indecision will tear you apart if you allow it to. But as you think about your life, I guarantee there are things that you're afraid of. I guarantee that there are things that not only that you're afraid of, but that you won't face, and because you won't face, are keeping you into a smaller existence. And so my question today, the journaling prompt or the thought experiment, however you're working through these maxims in your own life, is what is the thing that you're not willing to face? What you might find is that you're not willing to face it because you think it means something about you, and it doesn't. That's a bastardized manifestation of the role of fear in the first place. What you actually should be concerned with is what that thing is saying to you. What is the information that you need? What is the thing to take warning of, or to look for, or to work through? And once you get the information without the emotion, just like with the past, right? It's like we talked about this. The past really, it can't be useful to you until you take that emotion out of it, so that you can learn the true lesson of what it's trying to teach you. And I would say fundamentally, that's what we're trying to do with our fear as well. We're trying to face it so we can learn from it, synthesize the lesson, apply it to our lives. But the only way we get to do that is if we face it, if we stand, sort of in our truth and stare at our fears and look for the information that they have for us, because they always do have information for us. I love you guys. Hope you have an amazing day. We'll talk tomorrow on Morning Coffee.